After 400 years, a renovation discovers an untouched relic. Soot caked all over them, Danny Owen and his guys were furious. Now they were sorry to be here. Every noxious smell and gloomy aspect seemed to come to life. The guys cursed and coughed violently, but when the dust fell, they were all shocked by what they saw. Danny sensed that it was enormous. These guys had made a crucial discovery. Daniel Owen's friends scoffed when he told them he intended to launch a remodeling company. Danny was from a hamlet outside of Norwich, and his babyface appearance and local bar antics often proved to be his undoing. He was always coming up with fresh business ideas, but they never worked out. But this time, Danny was certain he was onto something. No one in the community gave Daniel's new brilliant business strategy any credence when word got out. Those close to him have seen all his plans and aspirations come to naught time and time again. But Daniel never gave up completely, that's for sure. To be honest, everyone found that about him to be admirable, even envied. He gave off the impression of having boundless self-assurance and inventiveness, and regardless of how many times he failed, he never gave up. But this time, he had a fresh issue to deal with. Daniel had repeatedly contacted every bank branch in town for a loan for his numerous bankrupt business endeavors. Unfortunately, he had not been able to repay the debts because all of his ideas were failing repeatedly. He was deeply in debt, but that wasn't even the worst part when he had this last thought. Few people were aware that Daniel was in a precarious and tight situation at the time. Daniel was forced to turn to a dubious local figure for his last business idea. Someone everyone in town knew about, but nobody dared to talk about. His name was Ford Callum. Although nothing was known about the guy's specific business practices, he was well known for disbursing loans at usurious interest rates. Numerous rumors claimed that the man was a potential hazard and a full-fledged loan shark. A few months earlier, Daniel had informed a couple of his pals that he had taken out a loan from Ford and had not yet made the repayment. Nothing bad had occurred to Daniel as far as everyone knew, but many were worried about his safety and what Ford may do. It was evident that Daniel needed to obtain the money on the other hand, but his options were becoming limited. He gave it some thought and came to the conclusion that there was only one thing he could do. Danny, who was short on money, begged his father for a little loan. After giving him a few serious glances, his father sighed once again. Danny continued to talk about how this was his chance to make it big, how his company concept had endless potential, and other similar things. "Okay, I'll give it to you, but you better get it right this time," his father told him as he interrupted. After expressing his sincere gratitude, Daniel assured him that he would succeed this time. He had no idea that the outcome would be entirely different from what he had anticipated. Danny started getting things done and contacted the men the same day, shortly after his father gave him the money. They were unexpectedly in agreement and fairly skilled with tools. All of a sudden, it was evident that while each man has unique abilities, when combined, they could tackle more ambitious tasks. One difficult issue remained to solve. When everything was finished, the guys were pleased with themselves for pooling their few resources of money and equipment. They registered a small business and were able to hunt for employment at last, being new and unproven. It was difficult to establish a name in the face of competition from bigger businesses, but they were shocked to get a call the very following day after placing an advertising. It appeared to be the ideal job. They were hired to do a large renovation project for the owner of a recently bought home tucked away in the English countryside. Completing it would provide them a significant cash boost to expand their company. But once at the massive property, it became clear why no one else had taken the position. The guys spoke with Mrs. Norris, the sprightly but elderly owner, and found out that she had bought the home as an investment. The property, which belonged to a previous duke, was falling apart but had a centuries-old history. Fearing for the men's safety inside the collapsing building, Mrs. Norris made an irresistible offer to seal the transaction. Mrs. Norris consented to cover their costs. She also offered them a 2% commission on the sale if they could successfully repair the home sufficiently for her to resell it for a profit. The guys gladly consented, swore to try their hardest, and requested Mrs. Norris to take a seat back, unwind, and let them handle the task. After expressing her gratitude, the woman left to do some errands. It looked like too wonderful to be true. But Mrs. Norris omitted one important detail. Danny and his crew had heard of the place previously, but it took them some time to grasp this. There was an older woman who lived there before Mrs. Norris purchased it. She had a reputation for being a reclusive, mysterious person who seldom ever left her home. Few people had ever spoken to her directly, and even fewer knew her name. But there were a lot of untruths about the woman floating throughout the community. She was, it seems, the last of a long line of nobles whose ancestors had been in the Middle Ages. The previous duke in issue was the last member of that line to become notorious. The town's oldest residents have many anecdotes about the duke in their memories. Some were merely wild conjecture and stories, while others were supported by clues from people who attested to their veracity. Nevertheless, there was a calm awe in the air, as if people were afraid that these things may really have happened. The previous duke was known to be a merciless and heartless individual. He was the most powerful man in town back then. As one traveled more into the area, it seemed as though the government's power diminished, and the duke emerged as the sole source of authority and governance. In town, he did as he wanted. He had, it was said, committed a number of horrible crimes during that period. Numerous witnesses testified that the duke had committed multiple crimes while in office, taking advantage of his near-total authority. Some even went so far as to claim that he was responsible for the disappearance of the two local children, Victoria and Lauren Poole, who went missing in September 1906 at the ages of 7 and 4. That wasn't all, though. The duke's daughter and his wife Alice, who lived in the mansion all the time, were also surrounded by an air of mystery and spookiness. The daughter of the duke never married. She was left alone with the notoriously dilapidated mansion when her parents died, and she never left. Her name was the Witch, and many in the town used to call her that, until one day she simply vanished. Danny's crew member had learned that the elderly woman was no longer residing in the residence. Nobody was aware, though, that Mrs. Norris had purchased it and intended to renovate it. Daniel and his colleagues were uneasy after learning about the legends surrounding the mansion and the dynasty who once owned it. Maybe they wouldn't have agreed to work at the house after learning about its history, but regrets were out of the question. What did all that matter anyway? What? The house and its previous owners had a dubious past? The walls, columns, and floors of the home were all that mattered to them, not the history of the people who had lived there years before. Now was the time to try, at least. Without any delay, the lads got to work. They didn't have to wait long to start regretting their choice. There were several passageways, a ballroom, and vast chambers with traces of pre-Victorian decor scattered across the site. It served as a grandiose reminder of the opulence and beauty of the time. It was now a ghost of its former self, full of dangers and low-hanging objects. The guys refused to give up despite the constant risk of ceiling collapses, since they were no longer certain they could ensure their safety. The men made progress as they worked out a safety routine. Working room by room, they were shielded from deadly mold by safety masks and supported by scaffolding. The men's toughest challenge to yet was clearing out a 400-year-old chimney when they arrived to the main lounge. The lounge was lovely, yet worn and brittle with age. There were also a lot of insects and bad smells in the area. Still, the chimney cleaning went rather smoothly at first. That is, until there descended a torrent of soot, leaving them enraged, furious, and smeared with filth. The soldiers were about to give up for the day when they saw something tucked under some mud and covered in grubby old clothes. The men unwrapped these with care. Something told them this wasn't simply old rubbish, since this ancient property had so much history. Their excitement increased as their hearts raced ahead as they removed each layer of the rags. They couldn't stop their gasps when they finally saw what was inside. They removed the rags layer by layer meticulously. They were never going to be ready for what they were going to discover inside the mysterious package and how it would affect their lives. They discovered bits of parchment with strange writing and patterns on them within. Initially, it appeared to be a map. She appeared strangely delighted when she came, calling Mrs. Norris. The men spread the pieces of parchment carefully. As she studied these, a broad smile stretched over her crow's feet. At last, she admitted that she was descended from the first duke and had in fact inherited the house. She had always been the ancient parchment, after all. The property was in ruins decades ago, and it seemed that the duke, a man of many costly vices and an insatiable hunger for pleasure but not enough intelligence to support his lifestyle, had wasted the family's fortune. On his deathbed, the Duke, the lady's father, confessed in her something that had plagued him for years and that he had never told a live person. He informed her that a valuable parchment had been concealed on the land for generations but had never been discovered. He was preoccupied with figuring out how to restore the past dynasty's wealth, and he spent the last years of his life searching for it, full of guilt for destroying it. The elderly woman had also made an unsuccessful attempt to locate it. At last, though, it was there, just in front of them. The only issue left was whether it could be brought back. Specialists discovered that it had been caught in a hidden chamber behind the brickwork of the chimney. The compartment had become loose over time. With close collaboration with the Scottish Museum, the map underwent a laborious restoration. The bits of parchment were assembled after much work, and what was found to be a vast antique map was revealed. Mrs. Norris was confronted with a perplexing realization when she brought the map to an appraiser. It was worth millions of dollars. It was one of the rarest maps in the world, dating back to the Roman occupation of Britain. The fact that Mrs. Norris's family had kept such a treasure intact for so many years was astounding. Soon after, as word spread, museums throughout the globe started looking for the map. However, the tale did not finish there. Danny Owen and his group received a hefty award from Mrs. Norris for their contribution to its discovery. They were able to gather sufficient funds as a consequence, and their business phone never stopped ringing. They were now known before them as treasure finders. Added bonus, anytime Danny comes up with a crazy idea, nobody questions him anymore. Some names, localities, and identifying traits have been modified to preserve the privacy of persons represented. All other details are the author's imagination. Any likenesses to real people, places, or events, living or dead, are pure coincidence.